Welcome back inside of Elliot's Loft, where the show podcast when black men talk is produced. I'm Mark Elliott. We've been on vacation for a few weeks, and the gentlemen are going to hang on vacation for a few more weeks. But I thought in the midst of that, why not get together and kind of put something together and do maybe one episode? And I want to thank you folks for listening to the past episodes while we've been on vacation. I really appreciate it. Glad you've taken the time out to give us an ear. But this episode, we're going to go back to a friend that was on the episodes many years ago. For some reason, she came on a few times. Then she decided she didn't like us no more. She stopped coming on. But for some reason, she decided that she wants to come back on, so we're going to have her back on. I'm talking about Lady Marci, or I can call her Dr. Marci as well. But she'll tell me which one to call her. But I'm just happy that she's here. Good morning, Marci. How are you?
Good morning. You can just call me friend.
Okay. No, I'm gonna say Lady Marcy. I'm gonna stay consistent. How you been?
I've been wonderful. How are you? It's so good to be
Doing
back on and to reconnect.
yeah, I'm doing well, doing well. Good to have you back on. But it's interesting how, this is starting to take place. And part of the reason why I wanted to do this episode with you is because I'm looking around the landscape of what's kind of really going on. And I wanted to salute women, sisters in our community. You're part of it. And I'm looking at these women that are doing some fabulous, miraculous things. And I just see an internal drive that's going on. It's been going on for a long period of time. And the day that Camilla Harris was kind of pushed out there to be the candidate for the president of the United States, my sister called me. And when she went into a conversation of speaking about when she was younger, and my sister is probably, let's say, 5, 6, 7 years older than me. But she said when she was younger, she remembered there was a time in her life when she was younger where a lot of the women were choosing education, going to college. And she looked at a lot of the men that were playing around, getting high, chasing women, running after white women. And she said it's going to come a time when women are going to run this country and dominate certain things because men really weren't stepping up. And when she was saying that, I'm like, wow, I've seen that and thought that myself over the years. And a lot of times, in a sense, I look at men, us collectively, we have a hard time putting our childish toys away. And we basically have done some things where we kind of lost track what we should have been doing. But on the other hand, if you stop and look back at women and look at their internal drive, look at the things that they're accomplishing and things that they're doing, and look how it's being brought forward into this country. So with that being said, I want to salute them and of course salute you because you have, that internal drive going on. When I met you, you weren't Dr. Marcy. Then you became Dr. Marcy. So, I want to take time out to basically say that if you all don't think some of us recognize it, at least I do, and I'm happy to see it. And I'm basically to see women flourish and prosper because you, as women in general, you guys really deal with a lot that doesn't get talked about. And sometimes it gets talked about in a negative way. I mean, you get your heart broken, you get all, and you have to fight through a lot of different things. And sometimes we focus more on that and not focus on the good and the beauty. So this morning, I wanted to start this out because you're back and salute you and others. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you. That was beautiful. You've always had this way of just kind of drilling right into the heart of the matter. And it's funny that you bring up about women's drive and ambitions and the continuous need for progression as far as women go. I was thinking the other day, we talk a lot about women being strong and women being independent, and people throw those words around like they're so complimentary and it's such an amazing thing that you're this strong woman. And I was thinking the other day, strong is only a compliment when you have options. If you don't have any other options other than to be strong, somehow it stops feeling like a compliment. It feels almost like a burden. And similarly with being fiercely independent, some of us would like nothing more than to have someone that we can depend on. And so I think that's where you see that drive and that continuous progression and striving for more and striving to do more and to be more and all of those things is because I think for a lot of us we feel like we have to. I was talking to a friend of mine not long ago and I told him, I said, I only got me. I don't have a plan B. There is no backup plan. If I don't hunt, I don't eat. And I think that kind of took him by surprise when I said that. but I don't think that men, and you can probably say for sure, but I don't think that men really understand what that's like for a woman to not have that backup plan, that fallback. Like, it is just me. If I don't hunt, I don't eat.
No, some of us do. Though you're right. There's a portion of us that don't really understand that, don't care. I mean, flat out don't care. Like I was saying earlier, how men have a tough time putting their childish things away, and in reality, we have lost traction, in my opinion, to Hennessy, weed, other foolish things that we're still doing as grown men. We're not putting those toys away. Now I
Mm-hmm.
realize those to be times maybe a celebration. We're doing that on a daily basis. And I came across I saw two videos recently, and I'm always trying to, I'm always guarding what I'm watching. But I saw this, and I thought maybe this is where the trend is going, and I wanted to get your opinion on this. I saw a couple of videos where men are basically blaming the woman. They weren't there when the woman was raising their children, but now that the children has been, let's say, not doing well, they're blaming the woman because it's like if you're there by yourself, you should have been doing a better job raising them. And it's almost, I looked at that and I was floored because what's happening, if that's, if men are taking this perspective, realistically, you don't want to take any accountability. You want to live your life. You knew you made these children. You want to live your life, and now these kids are raising hell in life. So you want to act like none of that falls upon you. You want to push it back into her backyard and act like she didn't do a good job. And again, to me, that's not accepting responsibility because it takes two to raise any children, any child. But when I saw, like I said, I saw, kind of the same nature video twice, and I couldn't believe it. I'm watching this, I'm going, how do you basically shun accountability and push that back? And you may start to see more of it, but I want to get your opinion on that.
Well, I think if you look at a family dynamic and as a glass of water. So the woman is one glass of water, and let's say she has three children, and then she's got a job and she's got church obligations, community obligations, whatever. So surrounding her are these five other glasses of water. Well, as I start to pour into each of my three children, into my career, into my community obligations, into my church life, um, at what point does the cup run dry? And I think that's the piece where men are missing is that, you can do all that you can do, but at some point your cup still runs dry. And that is in anything. But in particular, I think we see that when we're trying to raise children. And, there's the argument about, the mom being the mom and the dad. That's an irreplaceable role. Moms can't be dads and dads can't be moms. Kids needs both. Um, and so to try and push that you know responsibility, or like you said, the lack of accountability back on the parent who remained uh, diligent and held up their obligations to the best of their ability is childish to me. And that's grown boy talk in my
Hmm.
opinion.
Yeah. We are, responsible for our choices. Realistically, we definitely are. And sometimes I don't think we understand that the choices that we made, we, bear responsibilities. And sometimes those responsibilities don't work out favorably. But at the end of the day, every individual is responsible for their choices. And, sometimes too, we get caught up in terminology. And I see this from time to time. We get caught up in someone throw out a word that sounds fancy, sounds sophisticated, like, okay, instead of understanding the cause. And something you and I are going to basically discuss, for a period of time is generational curse. And to me, that's a phrase that's been put out there for quite a while. And it's interesting because I remember the first time I heard it, knowing words, I'm looking at it and I'm looking at generational. Okay, I get that. Then I get the word curse. Okay, I go, curse. And I said to myself, okay, I don't know how that happens. Does someone basically set aside and basically put a curse on a family and it runs through the generation? I'm not sure because when I look at curse, it's a sudden utterance intended to invoke a supernatural power. Okay. Then I go back to the terminology for bad behavior. And I look at how bad behavior is passed on from one generation to the next. Therefore, of the terminology generational curse, I see how that basically is underneath. So I wanted to kind of start there. And when you hear the terminology or the phrase generational curse, how does that sit with you?
Well, you and I have kind of had, an offline conversation about this previously too. And to me, when we hear, like you said, so the definition of curse being supernatural, to me, that equates to no accountability. I don't have to be accountable for it if it's a curse. It's something that's placed upon me. I can't do anything about it, and I just must deal with things as they are. Versus if we say that our situations and our circumstances. So if our situations and circumstances come from a generational curse, then it's on somebody else. We don't have to blame our parents. We don't have to hold them accountable. We don't have to hold a system accountable sometimes as far as the justice system, so forth and so on. So there's no accountability in curses. But if we look at it and we say, well, this is a generational system, well, my definition of a generational system, and I actually have a whole program that's foundationally based on this called Challenge to Change. And my definition for that is that it's a pre existing set of foundational beliefs and behaviors, and those are passed down from generation to generation. And so when we think about it like that, if they're foundational beliefs and behaviors, then that means it can be changed. And so, if it can be changed, now we have a sense of obligation and a sense of responsibility once we understand that it's a system that can be changed versus a curse, which we have no control over. That puts the onus back on us at some point in adulthood to start doing things differently. And I think that's where a lot of times either people don't know and understand the difference between a curse and a system, or they don't want to, because to know it and to understand it means you're accountable, just like you said, for your choices. And a lot of times people want to skirt accountability and say, well, that's just how I was raised. That's how I grew up. And as a child, sure. But as an adult, it's on us to start reconstructing what that system looks like so that those generational behaviors, those generational patterns and beliefs don't get passed down to the next generation.
Um, I agree with you, and that's how, to me, how it has got passed down. Because usually it's the older of the elders are kind of saying this in a sense when they're looking at someone's behavior or acting a way they shouldn't be carrying on, and it's almost like an excuse of a form of protection to where they kind of just say that. And going back to the idea of a generational curse, it's a person that's affected by actions, beliefs, and sins of the ancestor. And this is where, to me, a lot of the root goes to, because the sins of the ancestor, and this is where I believe this got played upon. This is where I believe the terminology itself, the wording of itself, really grew, and not understanding that. So they believe that behavior is passed down through generations, and it roots in generational false belief, is damaging the self-esteem, and it's really destructive to those. But what I saw over the years, when someone could say something about someone, well, that person or that family is under a generational curse, it's a justification, not really pulling back the covers and being honest about it. More or less, not that family hasn't chosen to do anything about it. So to me, justification carries big weight when in terms of focusing on one's behavior when they use the word generational curse. And sometimes I believe that people that had no understanding but use it in a form to act like they knew what they were talking about. And I'm gonna put this under ministers who right square at their feet, which kind of use that and say that, because once you kind of say that, you can relax a little bit, go like, there's no work that I can do because there's a curse, and you
Mm-hmm.
pull back. And I believe that's how too it was perpetrated deeply in our community, because you're valuing these folks saying such things, and why would they, they're who they're supposed to be, why are they saying some things that we can't believe and trust in? But in reality, that's justification, because they didn't really want to deal with the situation, they didn't really want to speak to it. And to me, as a minister, if you believe it was a curse, you should have been taking that on head on. But in reality, they kind of basically allow that to play itself out. So bad behavior, you could be a knucklehead, you can be a tramp or whatever, but they'll try to tie that back to, somebody of your ancestors years ago they never met, knew nothing about, but they want to roll it back to your ancestors. So I want to get your idea on the justification because we spend a lot of times, in my opinion, not only with you don't curse, but we spend a lot of time where if we can justify something, it makes it okay.
Well, and with that justification again goes back to the lack of accountability. Like you said, if I can tie it back to the ancestors, well, they're dead and gone, so they can't speak for themselves. They can't tell that side of the story. Regardless of if you fully know the story, you have to be honest about your present circumstance and start walking all the way back. And the work that I do through Challenge to Change takes people through that cognitive learning period, those years from birth to age 7, and then their extended learning period from 7 to 14. So from birth to 14, that's pivotal. So yes, your environment plays is paramount. Those familial beliefs and those familial behaviors. You think about domestic violence, and you can know domestic violence is wrong, but if you grew up in a household where that's how situations were handled, more than likely, whether you believe it was right or wrong, that let's say your dad, hit your mom, you may fundamentally believe that it's wrong, but because you grew up in that environment and didn't have the tools to challenge the situation and the circumstances, then you start acting in the same way. And I think that's where people tend to think that it's a generational quote curse. But even in that example, it's not a curse. It's still part of a system because it's controllable. It is within your control not to behave the way that you saw others behave growing up. Now, is that always easy? No. Is it going to come natural? Absolutely not. Is it instinctive? It's instinctive to do what you saw, not what you were taught. So think about when you were a kid, how many times adults would tell you, do as I say, not as I do. But as a child, in those early learning periods, we're going to do what we see. Even when we think that it's wrong, or we see a parent hit another parent, that makes us sad. It hurts our feelings. We know, even as a child, that that's not right. But when we grow up and we're faced with a similar circumstance, we're going to respond the way that we saw it handled in our familial situations. And that's why I say, as an adult, we have an obligation to change it. And that's why it's a generational system and not a curse, because it is within our control. It's not something that's irrevocable. You're not predestined to, behave this way. You do have a way out. Um, Also, when you think about generational curses, that puts a limit on your potential. If you tell me that I'm a kid, and oh, you're just going to be just like your parent, you're going to be just like your mom, you're going to be just like your dad, that's limiting my potential. If what you're referring to is something negative, cycles of incarceration. Oh, you just like your daddy, you act just like your daddy. Your mama was this, your mama was that, you act just like your mama. You're limiting a child's potential when you tell them that. So by the time they're old enough to start making determinations for themselves, the bar is set so low. And so then when they reach that low bar, or they fall into those habits and behaviors that were demonstrated for them, oh, see, it's generational curse. No, it's not. It's a system. You put them in a system, and you let the system raise them on this set of beliefs and behaviors, and this is the result that you get. Once you understand that, change the system, start challenging your beliefs, change your behaviors, you get a new result.
Let me take a little different turn here because I'm sure, as I spoke earlier about the ministers and how they kind of perpetrated this, and what you just said makes a lot of sense because if you believe you're cursed, you were not inspired to do much more than what you believe the curse is going to allow you to do.
Absolutely.
Imagine, imagine mentally how that's like a lid in your brain that you're already fighting against or trying to fight against, and you probably won't fight against because you believe there's no possible chance. And again, if that's given to you at a young child, and you believe you can't do any better, then whatever you can just feel I'll just go do what I need to do,
Mm-hmm.
and how it play itself out, it play itself out. But I wanted to go back to what I was saying about the ministers because realistically, this is where I don't think, like I said earlier, a lot of times people say something because they give themselves a title. We give them the power and authority to believe that everything they say has to kind of go right with what we're feeling. And imagine what you just said. Imagine someone sitting in a congregation of hundreds and they're speaking on generational curse and they're telling your family this is why you're feeling this way, this is why blah 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 blah. And you're taking all that in, you're soaking it up like a sponge. And imagine what you start to feel. Imagine now your kids aren't basically, doing what you wanted to do. So you think, well, there's not much I could do. You're not inspired to do anything or try to change your behavior because you feel you're underneath this. You feel a sense of helplessness. And to me, that's some serious manipulation. But with all that being said, I want to kind of go through something for a moment because God keeps loving kindness for thousands who forgives inequity, transgressions, and sin, yet by no means leave guilty unpunished, visiting the inequity of fathers on the children and on the grandchildren to the third and fourth generations. And that comes from Exodus 34:7. God declares that he visits inequity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generations of those that hate me. But God does not punish a new generation for the sins of a former generation. God does not hold children to basically, he doesn't hold them accountable, but he do wants them to learn from their mistakes that were made from the previous generations. Now, if you listen to all of that, where is that a generational curse?
It's not.
Where? I mean, where? But when the last time, seriously speaking, when the last time you've heard someone that claimed to have the authority from God say such? So you think about the misinformation that's been played onto our people by people we thought had our best interests in mind because they're speaking like they're coming from God, but yet they're putting you in a mental situation to keep the damage going on, to keep the lid on you mentally, you're thinking, but yet you return back there every Sunday to hear more of this nonsense. And it's amazing. And that to me, if anyone thinks there is a generational curse, to me, that just basically blows it out of the water. And there'll be some will fight with that because you want to believe what you've been told. You want to believe what your auntie, your mama told you years ago, your grandmama told you. You're not smart enough to stop and think for yourself. You want to believe what they said to you is right. And so what you're feeling is hard now to come from underneath feeling what you're feeling because you've been feeling this for so long, not realizing that's not what God wants you to feel. He hasn't created you to walk under a curse. I mean, to me, that's like totally two different things. So it's amazing to me. Here again, I kind of go back to that because I've had people say to me, something goes wrong in their family, whatever. Well, it's under generational what? How is that a generational curse? We forgot about trials and tribulations. So we just basically automatically, when a trial or tribulation comes, you can hook it up to a cord and go, that's a generational curse. No, that's a cop out. We don't understand what's really going on. You really don't want to dig deep. And then you want to understand that you've been lied to, misled by those you trust instead of trusting yourself to God. Just want to get your reaction to that.
Well, I think there's a number of things that come into play. Number one, we have to remember that pastors are human first. They are to help you understand the biblical principles and things that are shared in the Bible, but they are not God. And so I think we go wrong as a people when we start looking at a pastor as a conduit to God. Your relationship with God is separate from any pastor that you listen to. So I think we give them a little bit too much power and control from that standpoint, and that's a whole other show as far as where that comes from. Um, and then I also think that just like with any generational, whether you want to call it a curse, a trauma, or whatever, um, there's some validity to the passed down part. And so we think that just because something was passed down, then we tie that generational to it, and nobody's ever challenged the word, uh, never challenged whether or not it's a system or whether it's a curse. We just always accept that to be the proper terminology. And when you start to learn and understand, like you read in the very beginning, what a curse truly is, and then even taking it to biblical principles and tying it back to scripture, then I think it becomes very, very clear that it's not a curse. So if it's not a curse, then what is it? And then if we ask what is it long enough, pretty soon we have to have an accountability. And that's where this all goes back to. It's easy to say, well, they always said I wasn't going to be nothing. A child will live up to or down to their expectations that we place on them, right? Um, and it's not until they're given new evidence. And so if you keep a child in the same circle, the same community, the same mindset, surrounded by the same people who think all the same, and they're never shown different evidence, then what is the likelihood that they're going to question it? They're not. If you raise me from a little infant and you tell me that a brown crayon is purple, my whole life I'm going to believe that that brown crayon is a purple crayon until I have evidence. There has to be something that proves to me that it's different. But if we never know that there's an opportunity for it to be different, then we're not going to challenge it. And I think that's where we sort of get stuck in this cycle. And so when we think about generational stuff, it is really amazing. They did a study on mice using cherry blossoms. And I want to say it was, I can't remember if it was at Harvard or Emory or um, one of the universities did a study back, oh, maybe 10, 12 years ago. And the study that they did was they put mice in a container and they injected into the container the scent of cherry blossoms. And as soon as they gave the scent, they gave the mouse a shock. So scent of cherry blossoms equals shock. Scent of cherry blossom equals shock. And so they do this repetitively over time. And what that showed was that 4 generations later, the offspring from those mice also had a negative response to the scent of cherry blossoms, even though they had never been subjected to the same electronic stimuli. So there's truth and validity to certain things being passed down, but you can, once you understand that it's not predetermined, it's not irrevocable, it can be changed. And so you can, even in that case, you can condition that fear out of you, out of the mice, right? Um, is it, but it's going to take time and it's going to take intention. And I don't think we ever give ourselves the opportunity to go through that process. We just take that generational stimuli and we just go with it. We go with the flow. We don't ever question it. We don't ever challenge it. And we have to start challenging belief systems and understanding where did they come from, where they formulated it, and does it still apply to me? My childhood and the things that I saw in my childhood that affected me and had a negative impact on me, they no longer have the same hold on me that they once did because I learned how to challenge it and I learned how to challenge my beliefs and figure out why do I believe the things I believe. And that causes us to sometimes separate from communities, families, when we start realizing, like, what all y'all got going on over there no longer works for me because I have new evidence now.
Fear is a strong commodity. It really is. It really kind of stunts you from doing anything that will allow you to prosper. Do you love podcasts? Have you ever thought of
Yeah.
creating your own podcast? What are you waiting for? Get started at podup.com. PodUp is one of the sponsors of this podcast, and they would love to someday sponsor yours. Starting is as easy as creating an account at podup.com or podup.com today. PodUp has everything you need to run a full professional show with over 35 different tools with AI integration. Get a 7-day free trial with no credit card required and 15% off with the code when Black Men Talk 15. Don't have time to start a podcast? Check out podallies.com. Get a team of professional podcast folks to do all the website, social media, and editing work for you. Pod Allies is an agency run by the folks who built the PodUp podcasting software. Get started with them at podallies.com. Get 15% off when you sign up for PodUp or Pod Allies with code when Black Men Talk 15. PodUp and Pod Allies can't wait to create with you and launch your podcast. I was thinking a while ago, and I know I was speaking about the religious stuff. And I remember the first time you came on, we was doing a show, and you said something, and I just kind of go back to it. Well, I forgot the question, what the case may be, what I was talking about. But you said Jesus is on the main line. Tell him what you want. And I was like, man, how many times I heard my grandmother stand up in church and sing that song?
5 years old, singing it out loud and proud, didn't know what I was talking about, baby.
Oh my goodness, man. That was my one of my grandma Rosalie favorites right there, boy. You couldn't go to church on Sunday unless she got up and sung that song. Jesus on the main line. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you I hear you speak of system, and I'm with that. But I look at the word generational trauma, and if I could substitute the curse for trauma, I would love to do that because
Mm-hmm.
trauma is a deeply distressing experience, and it doesn't have to be generational. But trauma itself, basically, for the most part, it does is damaging. So generational trauma can be defined as a psychological and emotional wound that's accumulated over time and transferred into future generations. Now, when I hear that, I see more of the possibilities. I can understand that deeper as opposed to saying there's a curse. So, and you've been speaking of the system, and to me, it's just a change of words, realistically, trauma system, because realistically, there has been some things that basically may have had on that went, like you spoke of earlier, watching, maybe an abusive parent and experiencing that. And the trauma of that basically can set you to a different path in life. And it's interesting because to me, trauma, the word now, has taken on a different tone in a sense. It's now looked upon as basically being a psychological and emotional wound. More so, trauma now has basically allowed people to take a victim situation and roll that for a long period of time. And I know that's delicate. I know that really is. And it goes into victimhood. And what I want to do, I'm saying this now because we get together again. I want to do a show on victimhood because I think a lot of that comes from that. And I think as you were spoke earlier, where a lot of times we have to stop, identify, and decide what we're going to do different. But sometimes we don't want to do that, and we fall into the victimhood and get comfortable with it. So that'll be the next time we get together. But going back to generational trauma, here again, it's kind of like the same thing that I hear you're saying, in a sense, just that the word is different. Your reaction to it.
So I think yes and no. And the reason why I say yes and no is because trauma is within the system. So the system exists, and so generational systems exist, and within that there are positives and negatives, and there are traumas. So you can have a negative generational system that doesn't necessarily equate to trauma, um, but you can't. But generational trauma doesn't exist without the generational system that created it. If that makes sense.
No, it does. It does. I think the word there, when it comes to trauma and generational, putting them together, is basically what can be a little distorted in a sense, because as you just spoken, the system itself may have some generational things, not necessarily a trauma. So maybe the word generational should kind of just go away from trauma and trauma should stand by itself.
But I do think, well, and the reason why I said yes and no, because I do also feel, just like you said, like the psychological and emotional wounds that are passed down. And when I think about that, and I think about those generational traumas, I think about our parents and our grandparents and the experiences they had that created their belief systems and their fears. And I think trauma is deeply rooted in and is fear based. And if we don't understand where the fear comes from, then we can't challenge the fear. If we can't challenge the fear, we can't correct the fear. Um, so I do still agree that generational traumas are a thing, uh, but I also have enough evidence to know that even if the generational trauma exists, you can still correct it. You can still make adjustments. You can still choose to make new choices and do things different.
Look at us as a race of people and look at the word generational trauma. If we're gonna bring that back together and put it together. And if you would look at how we were treated in this country when we were brought to this country, you know, there should be generational trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And we still live underneath that some to an extent because even though we have certain liberties we have now, we don't have the full liberties that we should have as a race of people. And if you go back to, as you just were saying, if I go back 2 generations in my life, I go back to my grandparents, what they had to experience just basically just being a black individual in this country. I'm sure there was some traumas that they experienced.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm grateful to them, and I think about it, as I sit here and I think about it, even what they experienced from what I can look and see, what they experienced on that toll, they did not pass that on, or that didn't get passed down to me. And I can't say they didn't pass it on to their children. My thought first would be, no, they didn't. Looking at, my uncles and my aunts. But I don't see where that kind of played down. But I look how it came down from them to my mother and to us. I can't say that type of trauma that they experienced got passed down. Ironically, I even look at, I remember when I was younger watching um, some of the civil stuff on television, civil rights stuff, and hearing Martin Luther King playing in the house, and didn't really know too much about it. And the parents spoke a little bit about it. But what I realized over a period of time is that I become to a point in life where, when I was younger, that my family waited to a time to really let me know what was going on there in the racist world. They gave it to me at a time when I could have understood it more, and basically they gave it to me so I can be able to identify it, maneuver myself. Don't let it hinder me in what I need to do. Don't be afraid of it, how to deal with it. And so when I say that, even what my parents may have experienced, and I'm sure they did, because my parents, just thinking about them realistically, they met on a train coming up here to Connecticut. They were both come from South Carolina, and they had to sit in the back of the train. So imagine, we think about that. You go, man, what's so, I'm not gonna say what's so big about that, but that's traumatic on itself to think that other people are more special than you. They're gonna put them up
Mm-hmm.
front. They sat in the back. But even that being said, as they raised myself and my brothers, they didn't play into that. They didn't really speak of it in a negative sense. They made it sure, to where you're better. We all knew that. And we grew up with a sense of pride and not let us believe anyone is better than us based on the color of their skin. What they have doesn't make them better than you. So I look at that and I go to generational trauma because, again, as a race of people, and if you're not underneath this race, you just can't truly understand it. But in reality, we should have trauma running all through us. Your opinion?
And I think the fact that that logically makes sense that we should is where people get hung up and they stay stuck there because we have the right to have those experiences. But we also now understand we have a right to have a different life too. And I love what your parents did because what although they experienced those traumas and they had to process through what they experienced, they didn't pass the trauma on to you. What they did was they passed on information and they passed on tools. So that's where you understand that that trauma wasn't a curse for your family because your parents didn't allow it to be. And so when we give ourselves to permission, like you said, to have a certain position, whether it's of superiority or victimization, either one, we're giving ourselves permission to feel a certain type of way. And once we give ourselves that permission, it's a slippery slope from there to try and change it because now we feel justified. Or, oh, well, I've been through this and my family been through this, and this is why we do the things that we do. But if you have new opportunities and new information, then can't you make new choices? Does it always have to stay what always was, or could it still be something that it's never been before?
Hmm. When I hear that, and then actually you throw this word around pretty loosely. Then there came a period of time that I kind of pulled back away from it because sometimes it does sound mean to say, but just hearing what you're saying when you realize and you can make change and you don't make change, to me that's lazy. It's like it takes effort to change. And if you choose not to move into that lane, and it's hard, don't get me wrong, but hard does not mean impossible. Don't mean it can't get done. So it's like almost we don't want to face the hardness. So we rather stay where we are mentally. And I deem that as being lazy. And it's pervasive. Yeah, it's real pervasive because we choose to accept, especially when you know something, you choose to do nothing about it, then you don't complain about it. Just live with it. But I want to roll this into basically because a lot of people are experiencing all different types of trauma and not necessarily generational. It could be trauma from their childhood. It could be trauma something they experienced a few weeks ago. And as I said earlier, trauma now to me has taken on a version where if it's not really dealt with, it becomes that sort of victim type of thing or victimhood type of thing. But how can one allow them? And I'm saying you probably hadn't touched base on this already, but I want to be clear about this. How can one basically start to move themselves away from trauma itself?
To accept that it's not irrevocable, that what has happened to you, my mentor used to always tell me, don't ever look into your past for permission for your future. And oftentimes that's what we do because that's where our evidence is. But the evidence that we're going to find behind us is the evidence that created the belief systems and the behaviors that we currently have. So we have to look outside of that environment. Sometimes we have to look outside of our culture. Sometimes we have to look outside of our communities. Most always we have to look outside of our families because our families created what we started. And so I think that's the first step is to understand that it's not a predetermination of your possibilities no matter what your trauma is or was, or what your family experience is or was, or what your family history is or was, it's not predetermining what your future can be, and certainly not what the futures of your children and your children's children can be. And so we have an opportunity to start questioning all of that, our belief systems, our habits, our behaviors, our fears. Where does this stuff come from? Because it comes from somewhere. Fears just don't happen. Little kids, when we're born, we're not born fearful. We're born trusting. And the world creates fear. And
Yeah.
trauma supports the fear. And I think that's where it starts is accepting that it's not predetermined, that you're not predestined to relive your past.
Yeah. It's not your destiny. This
Right.
is not, yeah, it's not your goal. It's not what, our Heavenly Father wants for you. And it's interesting because when you really are baked into trauma, you start to, I can imagine, you start to feel that God doesn't care for me, he doesn't like me. But I think at those moments in time, we have to remember that's when he says, "Bring all your burdens to me, your cares to me." And for me, it starts there. It really starts there. And that may sound simple. It may sound like the Holy Ghost or whatever. But to me, when you start there and work your way from there, you'll be amazed how much peace starts to come to you and understanding that it's not your destiny, it's not yours. That things happen in life. Some of the trauma that you may have experienced had no control over. It was placed upon you. It wasn't like you were selected. It wasn't like you basically, won a ticket to get this drama. Evil and stuff and things happen in life. Don't let it define you. Don't stay there. Don't then continue to roll with it and feel that this just must be your calling. And as you stated, you have to understand that and work to come out of it. Take steps to work to come out of it. There's different things you can do. And I know, researching a little bit, they spoke of finding someone to speak to, and I'm not against that at all. If you need to find someone to really, do that, whatever your path is, but take a path. Just don't stay whole to it. Don't stay glued to it. Take a path. And again, realize it's not your destiny. It's not set for you. It wasn't created for you, but there's a way you can work yourself through it.
Yeah, the exercises that I give my clients when I'm doing working on trauma recovery with them, one of the things that we work on the most is understanding where things foundationally come from. And so I walk them through an exercise where they break their life down into increments of 10 years. So we look at our lives over decades, and we take each decade and break it down, and we're going to look at, what was our environmental factors, who was involved in your life at the time. You're going to look at what did those individuals teach you? Um, are there things that happen to you? Like you said, sometimes trauma just happens to us. Like we just draw that wrong card, right? So what happened to us in each of those decades? Because what that does is it starts to show what the patterns are. And it starts to show when we start exhibiting signs and symptoms as a result of our generational experiences and our familial influences. And so that's the first exercise. And then from that, we start really diving into the belief systems that are generated. So in each of those decades, so this is where I was, this is who was there, and this is what they taught me. And then from that, what beliefs were formulated from that? What did I learn about life? What did I learn about how I show up in the world? What did I learn about how I should respond to stimulation? How do I respond to individuals? How do I respond in certain circumstances? Were drugs and alcohol involved? Do I turn to substances for numbing and dulling and things like that? And then out, once we understand where the beliefs come from, then we start looking at our behaviors. Okay, now what behaviors am I demonstrating as a result of the beliefs? And that's where change starts to happen, because now I'm looking at my behaviors in a silo. I'm looking at just the behavior. I'm not tying all the emotional stuff to it that comes from, oh, my auntie always did this, my grandma, blah, 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 blah. I'm leaving all that emotional stuff. We already sorted through that. I'm looking at just my own behaviors. And are they behaviors that I want to change, or are these behaviors that I want to continue? And I separate the two. And then I step by step start working on the ones that I want to change. And that's the progression for recovery from trauma.
Good stuff. Good stuff, Lady Marcy. I want to I know I spoke of earlier. I'm gonna start to put this, put a wrap on this, but I want to thank you for bringing what you brought. Beautiful stuff. Um I want to take this conversation one day soon. Of course, I spoke on the victimhood, but I thought about this morning. I want to have a conversation where it seemed like it's a war. I don't know if you watched the movie years ago, War of the Roses. Um, Michael, if I can remember correctly, I think it was Michael Douglas and Glenn Close played in it, and they decided they was going to get a divorce, and they stayed in the same house, and they just did things to spite each other,
Oh,
and at the end of the day. they end up killing each other accidentally because they just it was a war of the
Mm,
roses.
mm, mm,
But
mm.
I look at the relationship between men and women, and it kind of reminds me of that to a degree, because it's like we're men are here and women are there, and we have our faults. And for some reason, we can't find a way to mesh our faults together and work and build a harmonious, healthy relationship. And to me, that deserves a conversation. And with that, we have to accept our responsibilities and be accountable for our faults. And I think a lot of times we come together, we act like we don't have any. We look at others and, we assume we're not carrying any faults from the past and that nature. But I really want to go deep into that. So at some point, set some time aside in your calendar for those two particular shows, and we're going to get you back in there, woman.
All
Now
right.
because what you bring is what you bring, and we appreciate it. So I want to thank you for setting some time aside and joining us here on Black Men Talk, and hopefully we get together and do this real soon. I appreciate
All right. Just call. Mark calls. I always answer.
it. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, I want to thank you for basically listening to some of our past episodes and rolling with us. Man, and I don't say this sense to brag, but I looked the other day at some of the statistics and some of the places where people are listening, and we're in about 16 different countries. 16 different countries. We're in about 147 different cities. And when we first, myself, Mr. Charles, Mr. Reese, when we first started this years ago, we were just getting together talking for 2 hours, just getting together, really talking. And I thank God how it's kind of manifested itself, how it's kind of worked itself, how things have turned to where now, where we are and how things have grown. And it's beautiful. It's real beautiful. And I say that with gratitude for those that give us an ear, because you can listen to anything else. If you're taking time out to hit play and play us, trust me, I appreciate it. Take care of yourself. God loves you and I do too. We'll talk again real soon.